Imagine leaning over an old stone well at twilight. The rope creaks, the water far below shines like a black eye, and when you whisper your name into the depths, something whispers back, but not your voice. The words taste wrong, like mud and ash. Welcome, traveler. Tonight we follow tales drawn from places where echoes answer with strangers' tongues, where silence breaks itself, and the dark leaves questions it refuses to end. Now start with first story. The Carpathian Mountains lay like sleeping beasts beneath their shroud of snow, white peaks rising into skies bruised with storm. Villages clung to their slopes like candle flames in the wind, fragile sparks of warmth in an endless winter. In one such village, hidden deep between two ridges where no road dared to linger long, stood a well. It was older than the church, older than the cobbled paths, older even than the carved stones that marked the graves on the hill. They called it Isvorul for a glass, the spring without voice. Yet the name was a lie, for it did speak. It spoke too much. No matter how deep the frost, the surface of the well never froze. Steam rose from its mouth in twisting ribbons, carrying a scent of wet earth and iron. When the wind was quiet, if you stood at the edge and listened, you could hear it whispering. Not the splash of water, but syllables forming, threads of language that slithered up the stones. The villagers forbade children from drawing near. They barred it with a crooked wooden lid, though the snow always slid from it as if the wood refused to rest easy. Yet travelers, ignorant of warnings, always found it. Roads vanished in the snow, but that well pulled footsteps to its rim, as if thirst were not for water, but for answers. There were stories. The shepherd who swore he heard his dead wife call his name from the depths. The woodcutter who whispered his sins into the dark and heard them recited back in a child's voice. The merchant who leaned close, only for the rope to creak as though the bucket rose by unseen hands. When he looked down, he swore the water reflected not his face but a stranger's smile, and there were others who did not return. One winter, a traveler arrived through the pass. He was tall, cloaked in fur, with eyes that gleamed like frost. He claimed he came from Brasov, though no one in the village had heard of him. He asked for shelter, for bread, for fire. They offered all, for hospitality was sacred in a land where the mountains punished the unkind. But when the night grew still, he asked about the well. His voice was curious, almost hungry. The innkeeper's wife warned him. It listens when it should not. Do not give it words. The traveler only smiled. He left before dawn. Snow fell thick that day, veiling the sky in white silence. Hours passed, and then the sound came, an echo that carried over the rooftops, though no voice had first spoken. It was the traveler's laugh, bright and sharp, rolling through the valley without source. Then silence. When the villagers went to the well, only his footprints marked the snow, leading to the rim and stopping there. The bucket ropes swayed, dripping. The seasons turned, but in that village, seasons were only shades of cold. Spring thawed the lower valleys, but here the snow lingered, blue with shadow. Children grew into adults who feared the well as their parents had, and whispered its tales like prayers in the night. One girl, however, was not afraid. Her name was Ilinka, and her mother said she was born with frost in her lungs, for she did not cry when the midwife struck her feet, only breathed soft fog into the air. She listened when others turned away. She wandered when others stayed by the fire. And always she dreamed of voices rising from stone. The old priest told her, "Child, it does not answer, it takes. Every echo it sends is the weight of a life it has swallowed." But Ilinka did not believe him. One dusk, when the sky burned red behind the peaks, she walked to the well. The lid sagged with snow, its planks brittle with rot. She set it aside and leaned close, her breath fogging the stone lip. "Who are you?" she whispered. The echo rose at once, crisp, clear. "Who are you?" But the voice was not hers. It was deeper, colder, and it spoke as though it already knew the answer. Ilinka's heart raced. "Why do you speak?" The echo came back softer this time. Not an answer, but a laugh. The same laugh that had haunted the village years before, belonging to the traveler who never returned. Ilinka should have fled, but she stayed. That night she told no one what she had heard, though in her sleep she dreamed of faces rising through the black water, mouths opening with words that belonged to the living. The days darkened. Wolves prowled nearer the homes. Doors froze shut and windows cracked from the cold. The well steamed on, patient, waiting. On the eve of Epiphany, when villagers gathered to bless the waters of the river, Ilinka went again to the well. She carried a candle, its flame trembling in the wind, and set it at the rim. "Tell me," she whispered, "what lies below?" The candle sputtered. From the depths rose her own voice, clear as her breath. "Tell me, what lies below?" Then another voice joined it, the voice of her father, who had died hunting in the mountains. Bones, and the hollow where prayers fall. Ilinka wept, though she did not know if it was grief or joy. The villagers found her at dawn, the candle still burning though the wax was gone, the flame feeding itself on the air. She did not speak of what she heard. But from then on, when others passed her in the street, they swore they heard two voices from her lips, one living, one echo. As years passed, more were lost to the well. A shepherd leaning to draw water, a boy chasing a stray goat, a woman who whispered her sins into its throat and heard them answered by the voice of her unborn child. Each time the echoes grew louder, rolling through the valley like restless crows circling the sky. The priest grew old, his sermons faltering. Before his death, he stood by the well one last time. "The mountain does not keep its dead," he whispered. "It only teaches them to speak again." And with that he dropped his rosary into the water. For weeks afterward, every villager who passed swore they heard its beads clicking in the dark, like teeth. The well still stands, snow heaps around it, but its mouth steams on, untouched by frost. Travelers still vanish when they wander too close, their laughter returning days later, carried on winds that never belonged to the valley. If you should find yourself among those peaks, remember, water is not always for thirst. And not every echo is yours to claim. Sometimes when the night is long and the wolves howl low, you can hear Ilinka singing at the rim, her voice doubled, harmonizing with something older, deeper, patient as stone. Her song fades into the silence of the pass. Yet the silence never lasts long, because something always whispers back. And as the mountain well sings on, travelers who follow the roads beyond its shadow find themselves in other lonely places, places where silence hides in drains, in pipes, in the mouths of motels that were never meant to welcome guests. And there, too, the echoes wait. Now start with second story. The Nevada desert stretched in every direction like a sheet of rusted iron, baked and brittle, endless beneath the pale moon. Highways cut through it like scars, straight, unbending, vanishing into heat shimmer by day and into shadow by night. Along one of these roads, halfway between nowhere and nothing, stood a motel. Its sign once glowed red and gold, the Dust Haven, but now only two letters sputtered faintly, hissing when the wind pushed sand against their bulbs. The building slouched under decades of heat and disuse. Paint peeled like old skin, windows were clouded with dust, and the doors of empty rooms gaped crooked, as if mouths too tired to call for help. Few stayed there anymore. Only truckers too tired to push on, drifters chasing shadows, or couples who couldn't afford a brighter place. Those who did rarely returned. The locals knew why. Beneath the motel, hidden behind rusted pipes and drain covers, lay a well, or rather what used to be one, long before the motel was built. They had capped it, disguised it, let plumbing snake through its throat. But the desert remembers. It remembers every word spoken into its hollow. Truckers told the stories in low voices. A laugh that came from the sink after midnight. A sob that echoed from the shower drain, even when the water was off. A whisper that called them by name from the toilet bowl, urgent, childlike, begging. And always, if they dared to whisper back, the voice would return, but not their own. One such story began with a man named Everett, a long-haul driver with miles of desert dust clinging to his clothes. He pulled into the dust haven just after dusk, his eyes bloodshot, his hands stiff from gripping the wheel. He didn't care about stories. He cared only for a bed and silence. The clerk at the front desk didn't look up when he signed the register. A small television hissed in the corner, static flashing blue over the man's gray face. The key slid across the counter with a sound like bone on stone. "Room 6, the clerk muttered. Everett carried his bag through a corridor lined with faded carpet that stank of mildew. The door to his room stuck before opening, wood swollen from years of heat. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the metallic tang of water left too long in pipes. The bathroom door hung ajar. Beyond it, the sink dripped, steady as a heartbeat. He washed his face, the water lukewarm, the pipes groaning as if reluctant to give. When he bent to rinse, he thought he heard something. A whisper threaded through the drip. He froze, listening. Nothing but silence. That night he dreamed of running water. But in the dream, the stream ran upward, climbing the walls, filling the sink, rising from the drain like breath. The next day, Everett tried to forget. He fueled up, drove the endless stretch, and swore not to stop until Reno. But by nightfall, fatigue bent his will. He pulled back into the same motel, the neon sign flickering as if it had been waiting. Room 6 again. The clerk said nothing, only slid the key. This time Everett brought his tape recorder. He wanted proof of the sound he thought he'd heard, or at least company in the silence. He set it on the bathroom counter, pressed record, and leaned over. The sink. "Hello?" he whispered. At first there was only the drip of water. Then, faintly, the recorder captured something else. A reply, but it wasn't his voice. A child's whisper rose from the drain, thin and desperate. "Hello?" Everett's blood chilled. He leaned closer. "Who are you?" The tape whirred, catching the sound. The drain answered with a voice like his own, but twisted, higher-pitched, frantic. "Who are you? Who are you?" He shut the water off. The pipes rattled, moaned. Something tapped from beneath the sink. 3 sharp knocks, then silence. The recorder spun on, its wheels sighing. Everett rewound and listened. His words were there, the voices too. But as the tape rolled on, it caught something else. Something he hadn't heard in the room itself. An order. "Open it." The words were low, guttural, unmistakable. "Open it." He should have left then. But the desert binds men in strange ways, and Everett stayed. He pried open the panel beneath the sink, revealing pipes rusted and damp, the smell of earth rising from below. At the base was a round grate, iron flaking into orange dust. From it came the faintest draft, cool, damp, smelling of stone and dark water. When he pressed his ear to it, the whisper returned. Closer now, clearer. A woman's sobs, broken by gasps. "Please, let me out." Everett staggered back, but the voice followed, climbing the pipes, threading the air like smoke. He stumbled from the room, into the hall, into the desert night. But even outside, the sound clung. It echoed in his ears as if the desert itself breathed through him. The next morning, room 6 stood empty. Everett's truck still idled in the lot, fuel low, door ajar. On the bed lay the recorder, tape wound to the end. The clerk, gray-faced as ever, carried it behind the desk, where other recorders lay stacked, silent as tombstones. None had been returned to their owners. Others told their own tales. A couple stopping for the night claimed the mirror in their bathroom fogged over, though the shower had never been turned on. Words appeared in the mist. "Let me sing." When they wiped it away, the glass cracked, splitting from corner to corner, like a scream frozen in silence. A drifter swore the toilet flushed by itself, water swirling black, not clear. From it rose voices counting backwards in unison, a countdown to something he couldn't bear to wait for. He left before the number reached 0. A young woman traveling alone said she woke to a knock, not at her door, but inside the sink. She leaned close and heard something tapping the porcelain from within, like fingernails on a coffin lid. The motel still stands, though the highway has long since rerouted. Its neon sputters against the desert dark, casting broken letters into the sand. Room 6 waits, its sink dripping, its drain breathing, its mirror fogging in silence. If you speak into its pipes, something will always answer, not always words. Sometimes laughter, sometimes commands, sometimes the sound of your own voice, return to you after being sharpened in the dark. And if you listen too long, if you lean too close, the drain will swallow more than water. It will swallow you. And so the desert whispers through pipes and drains, turning cheap motel rooms into hollow throats for echoes not our own. But far from highways, where towns bury their secrets deeper, the echoes rise again, carved into legend, bound to stone, and passed from one generation of frightened children to the next. Now start with third story. The town of Bracken Hollow was the sort of place maps forgot. A cluster of weathered houses leaned against the wind, and beyond them lay endless rows of cornfields, their dry husks rattling like bones when October winds rolled in. The cemetery perched at the edge of town, where earth dipped into shadow, a patch of crooked stones and iron fences swallowed by ivy. And there, at its heart, was the well. No one remembered who had built it. Its stones were rough, black with damp, furred with moss that never withered even in the dead of winter. The villagers told newcomers that the well had once watered the graves, back when the cemetery was young. But children whispered that it had always been there, older than the church, older than the town itself, a mouth in the earth that never closed. Every Halloween, when jack-o'-lanterns flickered against porch steps and brittle leaves skittered across the roads, children gathered at the cemetery gate. They called it the Hollow Eve Dare, to stand at the well, lean over its rim, and shout your own name into the dark. The rules were simple. If you ran before the echo returned, you were a coward. If you stayed, you had to listen. Listen until the well spoke your name back to you, but it never came back the same. Sometimes it returned in another voice, a stranger's accent, a tone older, heavier, weighted with years that did not belong to the child who spoke. Sometimes it came back broken, rasping, as though spoken by someone who had breathed their last. And sometimes it came back laughing. The children pretended to shrug it off, but their eyes betrayed them, wide and glistening under the harvest. Moon 1. Halloween, a boy named Samuel stepped up to the well. He was small, freckled, his father a gravedigger who had buried half the town. He had been dared 3 years in a row and had always run. That night, with the others chanting his name, he clenched his fists, leaned over the mossy rim, and shouted, "Samuel, Carter!" The sound rushed down the stones, tumbling into the black. The children waited, breath fogging in the cold. Then it returned, Samuel Carter. But the voice was wrong. It was old, wheezing, broken. It trembled like dry leaves caught in a dying wind. Samuel's eyes widened. He knew that voice. It was his grandmother's, spoken in the moment before death, when her breath had rattled in her throat like pebbles in a jar. The other children laughed nervously, nudging one another, but Samuel stumbled back, pale as bone. The next morning, when the sun climbed weak over the fields, Samuel and his friends returned. On the stones of the well, carved deep into moss and rock, was his name, not written by hand, but gouged as though by nails or teeth. Samuel Carter. No one admitted carving it. No one ever did. The legend grew with the years. One girl claimed the yow. Well whispered her name back in the voice of her unborn sibling, a child her mother had lost. A boy swore it called him by a name he had never told anyone, the name his parents had chosen before he was born. Another said he heard his name sung back, but in a mocking tune, as though the dead were playing games in the dark. And always the next day, their names appeared on the stone, etched in grooves the moss could not hide. The parents warned them. Away, but warnings fall thin on Halloween nights when pumpkins burn bright and dares taste sweeter than candy. The well waited, and the children came. One autumn, when the wind howled fierce and brittle, the Hollow Eve Dare claimed more than fright. A girl named Mary Ann stepped to the rim. She was bold, her laughter sharp as a crow's call, her hair braided tight. She leaned over and whispered her name softly, not a shout, but a dare to the darkness itself. The echo rose, not once, but 3 times. Each time a different voice, first her own, then the voice of her mother weeping, then a third, colder, rasping with earth. "Marianne," her friend screamed. Marianne only smiled, but the next morning her name was not carved into the stone. It was carved into the door of her house, and by nightfall she was gone. They searched the fields, the barns, the woods. Only her ribbon was found, snagged on the well's rim, dripping with dew, though no rain had fallen. From then on, the dare became darker. Children still came, but they came in whispers, their games tinged with dread. Some swore the well was hungrier, now that it took names not as echoes but as offerings. The cemetery fell into ruin. The fence rusted, graves slumped, vines choked the stones. The town grew smaller, houses emptying as families fled to brighter cities. But the well remained, moss thriving, its rim slick with night air. One Halloween night, long after most children had grown and left, 2 brothers returned. They had heard the stories as boys, and nostalgia tugged them back like a hook. They wanted proof, laughter, a memory of what once thrilled them. The older shouted his name, bold. The echo came back not in a voice, but in dozens, a chorus of whispers, all speaking his name at once, tumbling over one another, until the sound grew frantic, shrill, deafening. The younger shouted next, trembling. His name returned in silence, no echo, only the sound of dripping, as though the well were swallowing. The brothers left before dawn. Neither spoke of what they had heard. But the next day the townsfolk found both names carved deep into the cemetery gate. The legend endures still. Each year, on Halloween, children wander to the cemetery fence, daring one another in hushed voices. Some say the well no longer echoes. It listens instead, storing the names like coins at the bottom of a wishing well. Others say the echoes still return, but only to those whose graves wait empty, marked but unfilled. And if you walk by on such a night, you may hear them. Voices rising from stone, too many to count, repeating names until they blur together like leaves in the wind. Names of the living, names of the dead, and names not yet spoken by any tongue. And so the children's voices fade into whispers that do not belong, etched in moss and stone where no hands claim the carving. But beyond the cornfields and churchyards, in the frost-bitten silence of wilderness, another well waits, its rope frozen stiff, its bucket heavy with things that do not belong to thirst. Now start with 4th story. The Alaskan wilderness stretches wide and merciless, a country of white where the horizon disappears into cloud and snow swallows sound whole. For weeks at a time, storms sweep across the valleys, hammering against trees until they bow and snap, shrouding cabins until their chimneys vanish under drifts. In such places, silence is not peace. It is pressure. It waits. Deep in one valley, where mountains hunched like black shoulders against the sky, stood a hunting cabin. Its logs were worn silver with frost. Its roof sagged under the weight of storms. Yet hunters and trappers still came, for it had one gift they could not refuse: a well. Unlike rivers that froze solid and lakes buried in ice, this well never sealed. Its mouth steamed faintly, as though it breathed, a constant plume of white against the blue shadows of snow. A rope dangled into its throat, stiff with frost, its bucket clattering when the wind shifted. The old maps marked it as Kuyanik, which, in a dying dialect, meant that which repeats. The villagers in the coastal town below said the name was not for the water, but for the sound. The first story came from a trapper named Rourke. He was a man hardened by winters, with a beard crusted in frost and hands split from rope and cold iron. He had come to the cabin one February, when snow rose higher than the windows. His firewood dwindled, his breath froze against the glass. He went to the well, pulled the bucket, and drank. But when he leaned over, listening to the creak of the rope, he heard something else. His own voice. It rose from the throat of the well, faint, delayed, not repeating the words he had just spoken, but ones he had not yet said. "Don't stay here," it whispered. The voice was his own, trembling, desperate. Rourke staggered back, glancing at the empty woods. He thought it was exhaustion, hunger, the cold gnawing at his mind. He returned to the cabin, built his fire, and sat through the night. But hours later, when the storm screamed against the windows and the snow pressed higher against the door, he found himself muttering the very words he had heard. "Don't stay here." He hadn't meant to speak them. They simply tore themselves from his throat, exactly as he had heard them before. Others came with stories just as strange. A young couple snowbound one winter claimed the well answered them with screams that came from their own mouths hours later when wolves circled the cabin. Another man heard his own voice praying, though he swore he had not touched his knees to earth since he was a boy. Always the well spoke first. Always the travelers followed, repeating the script of their own undoing. But it was the rope that marked the end. In late March, when the thaw should have begun, the rope froze harder than bone. It crackled when pulled, frost creeping up the fibers like veins of glass. The bucket still descended, clattering against stone, but when it returned, it was heavier than water. Hunters swore the weight strained their arms, jerking them toward the dark. The sound of liquid sloshed faintly, yet when the bucket surfaced, it bore something else. One man drew it up to find a hunk of ice, but frozen within the block was the image of a face, his own, eyes wide, mouth screaming. Another pulled the bucket to find strips of sinew, meat pale and raw, steaming against the snow, though no animal had been near. The worst story belonged to a woman named Tessa, who had fled into the valley to escape a man who hunted her. She arrived, half frozen, lit a fire, and prayed the cabin would hold. She drew from the well, thirst raking her throat, but the bucket surfaced heavy, dripping not with water, but with something thick and dark. She brought it close, hands trembling. Blood, and when she leaned to peer into the bucket, the reflection that stared back was not hers, but the man she had fled, his smile wide, his teeth glistening, his lips moving, though no sound rose. The next morning, her tracks led away from the cabin into the snow, wandering in circles until they vanished. No body was ever found. The rope stiffened further each year until it snapped like frozen marrow when pulled too hard. Yet hunters still tried, driven by desperation, thirst, or morbid curiosity. The bucket groaned when lowered, and when it rose, the cabin filled with the smell of damp earth, of iron, of rot. Some swore the well had begun feeding itself, that the rope was no longer pulled by human hands alone. They spoke of returning to the cabin to find the bucket resting at the rim, brimming with black water, as though something had climbed the rope on its own. Others said the snow around the well grew warm at night, steaming through the drifts, melting patches that revealed handprints in the earth, prints too long, with fingers that curled like hooks. The villagers stopped going near. They left the valley to its storms, boarded their shutters, warned outsiders not to stray inland. Yet the well remained, a breath in the silence, a whisper in the blizzard. One hunter who survived a night there told his story in fragments. He said he had heard his own voice hours before he spoke, begging someone to help. And when dawn came, he understood why. For the well had whispered one last time, not in his voice but in 100, layered, writhing, voices speaking together. Drink, drink, drink. When he lowered the bucket, he claimed something rose to meet it. Hands, slick and pale, clawing. The rope. He fled, stumbling into snow that swallowed him waist-deep, not daring to look back. The cabin still stands, its roof caved in, its hearth long cold. But the well remains untouched. The rope, stiff as bone, rattles against stone in the wind. Travelers who pass that valley on rare hunts say they hear voices carrying over the drifts, not echoes but warnings given before mouths ever shape them. If you ever stand there, if the storm drives you to the cabin and thirst drives you to the well, you may hear yourself first. You may hear your scream echo long before you make it, and by the time it passes your lips, it will already be too late. And so the wilderness keeps its well, a frozen throat that swallows words before they're spoken, returning them sharpened with hunger. But beyond the snow and silence, where towns still breathe and buildings echo with footsteps, another well waits, hidden under the boards of a school, where children's voices recite lessons no one alive remembers. Now start with fifth story. There is a school that stands at the edge of town, its playground rusted, its windows blind with boards, its hallways thick with the dust of decades. Children once ran there, chasing balls across cracked blacktop, their laughter carrying into the fields. Now only the wind moves through the swings, squealing softly as if remembering the weight of legs that once kicked toward the sky. The building was locked and shuttered after the last bell rang, 30 years ago. But time does not seal things fully. Time only hides them, waits for someone to come and touch the lock, to listen close enough. It was the custodian who returned. His name was Walter, though most called him Walt. A man whose life had bent into the shape of routines, keys at his belt, broom in his hand, the smell of floor polish lingering on his coat. He attended this school when it was alive, when children scribbled chalk across the blackboards and the cafeteria steamed with soup. When the district abandoned the building, they left him a job, to check it twice a week, sweep the gym floor, and make sure no vandals pried their way inside. It was supposed to be simple. Empty halls, locked doors, silence. But silence, Walt soon learned, is rarely empty. The first time it happened was on a Tuesday evening in November. Snow clung to the windows, muffling the world outside. Walt pushed his broom across the long boards of the gymnasium, the sound of bristles scratching wood echoing up to the rafters, and then he heard it, soft, clear, rising through the floor. Beneath his boots, 1, 2, buckle my shoe, 3, 4, shut the door. A child's voice, sing-song, distant yet so near it made the hair on his arm stand. Walt stopped, broom frozen in mid-sweep. The gym lay still, the air dry with chalk dust. He held his breath. Again it came. The rhyme carried upward, as if from beneath the boards. Several voices now, not just one. The lilting rhythm of children reciting together. But the school had been closed for decades. Those voices belonged to no one alive. He told himself it was memory, a trick of the wind. Still, when he returned 2 nights later, the voices returned. Not rhymes this time, but recitations. The pledge, multiplication tables, fragments of lessons from another age. The cadence was unmistakable. Classrooms repeating after a teacher, lessons drilled until they became echoes themselves. Yet the sound came not from walls or halls, but from below. Walt pressed his ear to the gym floor. The wood was cold, but beneath it, he heard children speaking. Some laughed, others whispered, and once, just once, he swore he heard crying. Curiosity outweighed fear. Walt knelt, pushing aside dust, and pried loose a plank with the tip of his screwdriver. Beneath the wood lay blackness, a hollow space smelling of earth. And deeper still, he saw the rim of stone, a well. It had been sealed when the school was built, hidden beneath the gym floor as though the builders had known, but chosen to bury rather than fill. The children's voices grew stronger with the gap, open, drifting upward like breath. Walt whispered into the dark. "Hello?" The echo came back, not in his voice but in many. Children repeating the word together, first like a game, then rising into laughter. He slammed the board back into place and left early that night, but curiosity has its rope, and it pulls until the bucket rises. Walt returned again and again, each time lingering longer by the well. He asked questions. "Who's there?" The voices answered with giggles. "What do you want?" The voices whispered, "Play." When he asked their names, they recited. Back names from the past, some carved still into lockers, some etched in yellowed yearbooks left behind in the office. And then one night, when his voice trembled with fear, he asked, "Where are you?" The answer came back as crying, a chorus of sobs from children lost, hungry, desperate. The sound scraped through him like a rusted nail. Walt began to dream of the well. He dreamt of little hands pushing at the underside of the gym floor, fingers forcing up between the cracks. He dreamt of children standing in the bleachers, their eyes black pits, their mouths moving in whispers he could not hear. He woke sweating, yet each night returned to the school. Something compelled him, as though the well had fastened its rope around his throat. One night the voices called first. Before he had swept, before he had spoken, they rose through the floor in unison. Walt! They knew his name. He set the broom aside. He followed the sound down into the basement. The stairwell had always ended at the boiler room, its pipes long rusted, its concrete sweating with damp. But that night, he found something else. The wall at the far end stood open, a narrow stair spiraling downward into earth. He did not remember it being there. It should not have been there at all. The children's voices echoed up from the dark. Lessons, laughter, weeping. His name again, stretching into a sing-song call. Walt descended. The air grew colder, heavy with soil. The stairwell turned tighter, the walls wet stone. He smelled iron and something sweet, like rotting fruit. The voices grew louder, not around him, but inside him, pressing against his ribs, rattling his teeth. When his lantern flickered, he saw at the bottom not a room, but the wide black mouth of a well. Its rope dangled into nothing. Its stones glistened, with frost, though no cold should have lived that deep. The voices chorused. Some laughed, some sobbed, some begged. All at once they whispered his name. He leaned closer, and the stairwell ended. When the principal came weeks later to check the building, the gym lay silent. Dust filmed the boards. Only one thing seemed out of place. At the center of the floor, a mop stood upright. Its handle balanced perfectly, its stringed head wet though the air was dry. Water dripped into the dust, marking circles that spread, wider, wider, until they vanished into nothing. Walt's keys were still at his belt, his flashlight still in his locker, but Walt himself was never found. And at night, when the snow drives against the windows and the wind carries across the blacktop, some say you can hear a broom dragging across the gym floor, sweeping forever. The school doors remain locked, but children's voices still carry, weaving through wood and dust, begging for answers from anyone who dares to listen. And beyond schools, beyond towns, even deeper into the woods, there are wells left to rot in cemeteries, where names and echoes twist into the accents of the dead. Now start with sixth story. In the quiet stretch of countryside where fields blur into woods, there stood a farmhouse with its shutters drawn and its roof sagging under years of storms. At its edge, half hidden in nettles, lay a well. Its stones were pale with moss, its mouth dark, its rope long rotted away. Few approached it, but one woman did. Her name was Margaret. She had once been a mother, her days filled with small footsteps on creaking stairs, the hum of lullabies, the soft clatter of wooden toys on the floor. But after sickness swept through the town, her only child was carried away in a fevered silence, leaving the rooms hollow and the house echoing with absence. Neighbors said she rarely left the property after. They saw her in the fields sometimes, scarf trailing, shoulders bowed, lips moving, though no one was there to hear. And then, they said, she began to sing. It was to the well she carried her voice. At dusk, when the air turned silver and the birches creaked like restless sleepers, Margaret walked to the stones. She leaned close, whispering lullabies into its throat. Hush, my darling, don't you cry. Her voice drifted downward, caught by stone, spiraling into dark. For days there was only silence in return. But grief has patience. And she returned, again and again. Each night she pressed her lips to the hollow air, her songs unraveling like threads, hoping some shred of her child might gather them, hold them. And then one evening the well answered. The voice that rose was not hers. It was faint, thin as a breath, a child's murmur, no louder than the sigh of leaves. Mama, Margaret's breath caught. The word was her undoing. It was not just a sound, it was her child's voice, shaping the syllables exactly as it had in life, as if carried back whole from the grave. She fell to her knees, tears blurring the rim of stone. She whispered his name into the dark. The echo returned, not her whisper, but his laugh, soft, warm, and impossibly near. From that night, the well became her confessional, her cradle, her church. The neighbors began to notice. They saw her at dusk, scarf tugged by the wind, body bent over the well like a figure in prayer. They heard her songs carry faint across the fields, weaving with the cry of night birds. And sometimes, they swore, they heard another voice, higher, younger, a child's voice answering, weaving into her lullaby, finishing verses she had not sung. They told themselves it was grief. They told themselves it was memory, but Margaret herself no longer doubted. Each night, she leaned closer. Each night, the child's murmur grew stronger. It whispered her name. It asked questions. Why did you let me go? Why won't you? Come down? Sing for me, Mama. Sing closer. Her heart tore anew, yet she obeyed. She sang, she leaned. She pressed her ear to the mouth of the well as though it were a cradle, rocking gently. And each night, the pull grew heavier. The last time she was seen was on a Thursday, dusk bleeding into rain. A neighbor, carrying feed to his barn, glimpsed her standing at the well. She was singing, but her song broke often, caught between laughter and sobbing. Her scarf fluttered in the wind. He thought nothing of it, went on his way. The next morning she was gone. The yard lay silent, the door locked, the hearth cold. The well's stones were slick with rain, but at its lip, caught tight in moss, hung her scarf. The fabric was torn, threads trailing downward into the dark. There were no footprints leading away. For weeks after, the neighbors claimed the well sang on its own. Not with Margaret's voice, nor with any living soul, but with her lullaby. The sound rose faintly at dusk, rocking back and forth as though the stones themselves swayed in time. Some swore they heard a second voice humming along. A child's voice, sweet and broken, echoing from the deep. Others avoided the farm entirely, crossing fields to keep their distance. For those who lingered said the lullaby was changing, that its words had grown sharper, heavier, until it no longer soothed but commanded. One farmer's boy crept close one evening, daring himself to listen. He came home pale, silent, refusing to eat for days. When pressed, he whispered only one thing. It said my name. No one sent him back again. The farmhouse has long since collapsed, its roof caved, its walls a husk. But the well still stands, stones green with moss, scarf threads caught forever between cracks. Travelers who stray too near in the quiet hours claim they hear a woman singing, soft and steady, and beneath her voice the thinner sound of a child urging her closer. If you stand there long enough, the voices will notice you. They will call your name. They will ask you to lean closer, closer, until the well is all you see, until the song is all you hear. And if you answer, if you let your voice join theirs, the well will keep it. It always keeps what it is given. And so the well cradles more than water. It rocks with songs of grief, keeping voices that should never have survived the earth. But there are other echoes too, not born from love, but from hunger. For in the vault of a collector's home, a mirror waits, its glass cloudy, whispering answers no one dares to ask aloud. Now start with seventh story. The market square was alive with sound. Stalls groaned under heaps of fruit, leather goods, brass trinkets. Hawkers sang their bargains into the air. Children darted between carts with sticky fingers. Yet above all this noise, another sound lingered. An echo that lived in the stones of the old well at the square's center. Generations had tossed coins into that mouth, their wishes sinking into the unseen dark. Lovers asked for fortune, merchants begged for wealth, mothers for health of their children. Some swore the well had answered, though it had never been clear whether it granted what was wanted, or simply took something in exchange. No one thought much of it anymore. The well was tradition, habit, ritual. People threw, they wished, they walked on until one man lingered. His name was Callum, a traveler who carried little more than the weight of debts and the hunger for luck. He came through the square one autumn morning, his boots worn, his coat patched, his purse near empty. In his palm rested a single coin, silver, tarnished at the edges, all he had left. He stared at the well, at the crowd tossing copper and bronze, and thought of chance, of risk. He kissed the coin, whispered a wish too desperate to name, and tossed it into the dark. The clink of metal rang sharp against stone, but what rose from the well was not silence. It was his own voice. More, it said. Callum froze, the hairs on his neck prickling. His lips had not moved, yet the voice that climbed out was his, the cadence exact, but lower, heavier, more than silver, more than luck. Offer breath. The crowd around him chattered, laughed, bartered, oblivious. But to Callum, the square had hushed, his heart beating in his ears. He stumbled back, whispering, "No, no, I gave enough." And the echo answered, his own voice whispering from the dark, "Not enough." That night, as he lay in his rented room above a tavern, he felt something hard against his thigh. He reached into his pocket, and there it was, the silver coin, the very one he had thrown. It was warm, not the faint heat of skin, but the deep warmth of blood pulsing, as though it had a heart of its own. He hurled it into the fire. The flames hissed, sparked, flared. But when he turned away, when he checked his pocket again, the coin was there, warm, waiting. Each day he tried again. He dropped it in rivers. He pressed it into beggars' hands. He buried it beneath stone. Each night it returned, slipping into his pocket as though it had always belonged there. And with each return it grew hotter, pulsing against his leg like something alive. And each night, when sleep nearly claimed him, he heard the faint clink of it hitting stone, echoing through the dark as though the well itself lived inside his chest. He returned to the market square, trembling, coin slick with sweat. He hurled it again into the well, desperate. This time the echo rose not in his voice alone, but in a layering chorus. Half a dozen versions of himself, some younger, some older, some broken, all whispering bargains he had never made. Take my eyes, take my tongue, take my breath. The crowd nearby did not stir. Only Callum heard. He staggered back, clutching his ears, and in his pocket the coin clinked softly, having never left. Days blurred. His reflection in glass grew dimmer, his breath shorter, as though each exhale belonged less to him. His shadow lingered a second too long behind him. His voice cracked in ways that were not age but something pulling. He tried to rid himself one last time, traveling miles from the town, scaling cliffs where the sea roared. He threw the coin into the surf, watched it vanish into white foam, and that night, as he trudged back to his room, the tavern quiet with sleep, he reached again into his pocket. The coin was there, but now it was burning. He dropped it onto the table. The wood hissed, blackening beneath, and before his eyes, letters began to etch themselves into the surface of the coin, slow and deliberate, like scratches made by nails. Offer breath. His chest tightened. He gasped, choking, the air torn from him. His lungs heaved, but the air came shallow, strangled, as though drawn down into the silver pressed against the table. And then he heard it again, the clink of the coin striking stone, not here in the room, but somewhere deeper, somewhere below, echoing upward. And the echo no longer sounded like him at all. When the tavern keeper entered the next morning, Callum was gone. The bed unslept, the door still locked. On the table lay the coin, silver. Bright cold once more, the keeper pocketed it without thought. They say the coin still circles the market square. Each time it passes hands, it returns to the well, tossed by the desperate or the careless. Each time, the echo answers, sometimes faint, sometimes sharp. Some say it bargains, some say it demands, but all agree. Once it is yours, you cannot rid yourself of it, and if you listen close, you may hear the clink in your pocket even now, the faint weight pulling you toward the well. Not for your silver, not for your wish, for your breath. So the coin moves, changing hands, each echo less human than the last, each bargain deeper than silence. But deeper still lie echoes that were never bargained for at all. echoes captured on tape, frozen in analog, reels whispering from screens long after the people in them are gone. Now start with eighth story. The VHS cassette was discovered in a box of junk at an estate sale, wedged between old family films and forgotten instructional tapes. Its spine bore no title, only a fading sticker marked with a single word. Well, the man who bought it wasn't looking for horror. He was a collector of obsolete formats, curious only about what ghosts of the past flickered across old screens. He carried the box home, dust clinging to his clothes, unaware of the weight in that unlabeled plastic shell. That night, curiosity won. He slid the cassette into a VCR, the machine whining as it swallowed the tape. A screen of static rolled, and then images began. The picture was rough, the grain thick, the colors bleeding at the edges, but the shape of a forest emerged. Branches clawed into a pale sky. A group of teenagers stumbled into frame, laughing, shoving one another. Their jackets and hairstyles were relics of the 1980s. Big hair, denim, neon stripes. One of them held the camcorder, its view unsteady. Another pointed toward a hollow in the trees where a mound of stones lay collapsed inward. A well, or what had once been one. Its lip had crumbled, stones broken, moss growing thick where water once shimmered. Now it yawned open like a throat, damp and black, breathing cold mist into the air. The camera lingered. Someone off-screen dared the others to shout into it. They laughed, the sound shrill against the hush of the woods, and one by one, they leaned over the stones. The first boy shouted his name. His voice fell into the hole, swallowed by the dark. Nothing returned. But when the camera's built-in microphone played the recording back seconds later, there was a reply. Not his voice, not laughter, but a scream. Distant, ragged, echoing upward, like something falling forever. The group didn't react. They hadn't heard it. Their laughter filled the clearing, their shoves and taunts overlapping. But the camcorder had captured it, pressed into magnetic tape, looping with the whine of the spools. The second teenager leaned in, a girl with bangs curled high. She shouted a curse into the well, smirking. Silence answered in the woods. But on playback, the tape hissed. Words rose from the dark, foreign, choked, like a prayer recited underwater. The girl's smile faltered on screen, but not because she heard it. Only the tape knew. One by one they leaned, shouted, joked, and with each voice offered, another returned. Sometimes laughter warped into crying. Sometimes names came back aged, cracked, whispered in voices that sounded decades older. And then, in one moment that lasted too long, a voice began to count. Backwards. 10, 9, 8. The numbers fell, heavy, dragging the sound of static with them. The group on screen laughed, oblivious, shoving one another, thinking it only the echo of their own noise. But the camcorder's ear caught every number, pulling it tight into the tape, searing it into plastic and ribbon. Then the tape faltered, the picture warped, the frame bending like heat ripples, the forest trees folding in on themselves. For a few seconds, there was only static, black and white, snow. Then it cleared again. But now the well was closer. The teenagers no longer stood around it. The camera leaned over its mouth, staring down into the dark, the stones rimmed with shadow. No voices now, no laughter, only breathing. Close, wet, as though the camcorder itself had lungs pressed against the lens. The tape jittered, cutting, jumping. Frames. A flash of the girl's shoes, scuffed white sneakers at the lip of the well. Another flash, the boy's hand, pale against moss. Then laughter, brief, sharp. It cut mid-note, the sound torn off like a thread pulled taut. The screen rolled, with static. But the static was not empty. Through the hiss came sound, flesh shifting, air dragging through damp lungs, lips parting, a throat swallowing, breathing. So close it fogged the screen itself, the picture darkening in pulses, as though something pressed against the glass from inside the tape. The man watching leaned forward, hand frozen on the VCR remote. He whispered, What the hell? And in that moment, the breathing slowed, syncing with his own. Each inhale matched his chest. Each exhale dragged against his ribs. And then it stopped. The screen went black. He pressed eject, desperate to spit the tape out. But the machine whirred and clunked, refusing. The cassette jammed inside, the reels still spinning though no picture showed. From the black screen came a single sound. A voice. Not the laughter of children, not the scream of strangers, but his own voice, whispering from the speakers, cracked. With static, offer breath. The room went still. His chest ached. He pressed power, yanked cords from the wall, but still the machine spun. The sound of his own whisper filled the room, circling, layering, until it no longer belonged to him at all. Neighbors said they heard the television through the night, static rolling like ocean waves, a voice tangled inside. By morning, the apartment was empty. Only the VCR remained, the cassette trapped inside, reels still gently turning. The tape has surfaced again since then. In collectors' forums, on shelves at thrift stores, passed hand to hand. Some call it a hoax, an urban legend. Others refuse to speak of it. But always it bears the same label. Smudged, scratched, half-peeled. Well, and when it plays, no matter the player, no matter the screen, it breathes, close, wet, waiting. Not for your coin, not for your wish, but for your breath. And so the reel spins, each turn pulling voices into the dark, each playback thick with echoes that were never truly gone. Yet the well does not end in stone or tape alone. For whole towns have vanished into its silence, snow burying their cries until only knocking beneath the drifts remains. When the screen fades, the echoes linger, breath against glass, whispers that will not die. Tonight's voices are silenced, but the well is never full. Somewhere it waits, mouth open, listening for you. Lean closer, traveler, and hear what answers back when the dark decides to speak.